The sky darkened prematurely that afternoon, as if night had decided to arrive early. Ainsley, a 28-year-old teacher, looked worriedly through the school window while putting the last notebooks in her worn bag. Her brown hair fell in waves over her shoulders, and her honey-colored eyes reflected apprehension as she watched the storm forming. Of medium height and delicate build, Ainsley carried on her face an expression of permanent gentleness that easily won the trust of her students. Sighing deeply, she placed the bag over her shoulder and walked to the door, where she said goodbye to the principal. The sound of rain was already deafening when she reached her car. "I'll need to drive very carefully today," she murmured to herself as she turned the key in the ignition. "This storm seems different, stronger than the others." The old blue automobile protested with a rumble before finally starting. Ainsley had saved for 3 years to buy it, even though it was an old model. Despite financial limitations, she felt fulfilled with her profession of teaching children. The salary was modest, barely covering basic necessities, but the sparkle in her students' eyes when they learned something new made everything worthwhile. The rain was now battering the windshield, drastically reducing visibility. Ainsley's hands gripped the steering wheel tightly as she slowly advanced through streets that were beginning to flood. The wipers worked at maximum speed, but seemed insufficient against the fury of the storm. The young teacher felt her heart racing with each thunder that cut across the sky. "I've never seen anything like this before," she said aloud, as if she needed to hear her own voice to calm her nerves. "If it continues like this, I might have to stop somewhere until the rain subsides." Ainsley continued advancing through increasingly deserted streets. Most people had sought shelter, and the very few still venturing outside were running desperately. The water level in the streets was visibly rising, making the car sway in some deeper puddles. Turning a corner, her headlights illuminated a scene that made her heart sink. A small figure leaning against a wall, partially protected by a broken awning. It was a child. Without thinking twice, Ainsley reduced her speed and brought the car closer to the sidewalk. Through the curtain of rain, she could distinguish better. A small girl, perhaps 8 years old, completely soaked and hugging her own body in a futile attempt to protect herself from the cold. "My God, what is this child doing alone in this storm?" Ainsley exclaimed, quickly turning off the car. "I need to help her before she gets sick." With umbrella in hand, Ainsley got out of the car and ran to the girl. Up close, the situation seemed even worse. The child had black hair soaked by rain stuck to her pale face, large frightened eyes of a deep brown, and simple clothes that hardly seemed adequate for a normal day, let alone for a storm of that magnitude. Her lips had a slightly purplish tone, and she was visibly shaking. Ainsley crouched down, trying to shelter both of them with the umbrella that was already beginning to turn with the strong wind. "Hello, little one. What are you doing here alone?" "Where are your parents?" asked Ainsley with a soft voice, trying not to frighten the girl even more, who was watching her with suspicion. "My mother." "She's not here anymore," responded the child with a weak voice, almost inaudible under the noise of the rain. "I have nowhere to go." Ainsley's heart ached even more upon hearing those words. The girl seemed to be completely alone in the world. Her eyes, although frightened, contained a sadness that no child should know. At that moment, lightning cut across the sky, followed by a deafening thunder that fell so close that Ainsley felt the vibration in her chest. The girl let out a sharp cry and instinctively grabbed Ainsley's arm, who wrapped her protectively. Fear had momentarily overcome the little one's distrust. Feeling how cold the child was, Ainsley made an immediate decision. She couldn't leave her there. "Come with me, little one. You can't stay here in this storm. I'll take you to a safe and warm place," offered Ainsley, extending her hand. "What's your name, Quinn?" replied the girl after a few seconds of hesitation, her voice still trembling. "You're not going to take me to the people who take children away, are you?" The helplessness in Quinn's question made Ainsley silently vow that she would do everything in her power to protect this child. With a gentle gesture, she adjusted a strand of wet hair that fell over the girl's face and smiled reassuringly. Another thunder boomed even closer, making Quinn grab onto Ainsley again, who took advantage of the moment to quickly guide her to the car. Once inside, Ainsley turned the heater to maximum power and took off her own coat, placing it over Quinn's trembling shoulders. The girl looked like a wet little bird, small and fragile in the passenger seat. Observing her better under the car's interior light, Ainsley could see that Quinn was not only wet and cold, but visibly malnourished. Her cheeks were sunken, and the wrists that emerged from the wet sleeves were as thin as twigs. "How long have you been alone, Quinn?" Ainsley asked gently, while trying to dry the girl's face with a clean tissue. "Mum got sick a long time ago," Quinn replied, her eyes fixed on her own hands. She fell asleep forever. "She said I should look for the man with the medallion, but I don't know who he is." As Quinn spoke, Ainsley noticed something shiny partially hidden under the girl's wet shirt. It appeared to be a golden medallion, contrasting strongly with her worn clothes. Before she could ask about it, she noticed how exhausted Quinn looked. Determined, Ainsley started the car. Her apartment was just a few blocks away, and the sooner she could warm and feed Quinn, the better. The journey was difficult. The streets were increasingly flooded, and in some stretches the water reached almost halfway up the wheels of the car. The old automobile protested, occasionally sputtering, which made Ainsley hold her breath, fearing they wouldn't make it. Quinn watched the storm through the window, her enormous eyes reflecting the lightning that continued to cut through the darkened sky. "My mommy used to say that thunder is angels bowling in heaven," Quinn murmured, a slight smile appearing on her lips for the first time. "Do you think she's up there now, playing with them?" Ainsley finally managed to park near her building, an old 3-story structure with a simple facade. Taking Quinn in her arms, she ran under the torrential rain to the entrance. Ainsley's apartment was on the 2nd floor, and she quickly climbed the stairs, protecting Quinn as best she could. The place was small but cozy, a modest living room connected to an American-style kitchen, a bedroom, and a bathroom. It wasn't luxurious, but it was impeccably clean and organized, with a few potted plants on the windows and books stacked on simple shelves. Quinn looked around with silent curiosity, still wrapped in Ainsley's coat that was now also wet. The teacher realized she needed to act quickly to prevent the girl from getting even sicker. "Let's get those wet clothes off. I'll give you a hot bath and lend you some of my clothes." "They'll be big, but at least they'll be dry," said Ainsley, guiding Quinn to the bathroom. "Then I'll prepare something hot for you to eat. Are you hungry?" "I haven't eaten anything since yesterday," Quinn admitted in a low voice, as if she were ashamed. "Mum used to save food for me, but after she went away." The hot bath seemed to bring some color back to Quinn's pale cheeks. Ainsley lent her a t-shirt that served as a dress on the small girl. While the child warmed up wrapped in a blanket on the couch, Ainsley went to the kitchen to prepare a nutritious soup with the ingredients she had at home, some potatoes, carrots, and a bit of chicken. The apartment soon filled with the comforting aroma of food. Through the kitchen window, Ainsley could see that the storm continued to worsen. The wind howled, making the windows tremble, and the rain seemed to fall with renewed force. A deafening noise of wood breaking and a sudden tremor made Ainsley run to the living room window, from where she could see that a huge tree had just fallen, completely blocking the only access road to the neighborhood. "Looks like we're isolated for now," she commented, trying to keep her voice calm so as not to alarm Quinn. "But we're safe in here. The soup is almost ready." "Thank you for helping me," Quinn replied with a small smile that didn't reach her sad eyes. "Mum used to say there are angels disguised as normal people." Ainsley smiled in response and returned to the kitchen to finish the soup. When she returned to the living room with a steaming bowl, she found Quinn examining the gold medallion that hung from her neck. It was a beautiful piece, obviously valuable with delicate engravings, completely at odds with the rest of the girl's possessions. Quinn noticed Ainsley's curious look and held the object carefully. "It was my mother's," Quinn explained. "She said it belonged to my father, that someday I should find him and show it to him, but I don't know who he is or how to find him. Mom always said she would tell me everything one day." Ainsley nodded understandingly and offered the soup to Quinn, who began to eat eagerly, confirming how hungry she was. However, after a few minutes, the girl started coughing violently, dropping the spoon in the bowl. The coughing wouldn't stop, becoming increasingly stronger until Quinn had difficulty breathing. Ainsley rushed to her side, patting her back, but the situation worsened with each second. Suddenly, Quinn fell to the side, fainting onto the living room floor. Alarmed, Ainsley took her in her arms. The girl was burning with fever. "Quinn! Quinn, wake up!" called Ainsley desperately, touching the child's face. "My God, she's burning up!" Carefully, Ainsley carried Quinn to her bedroom. and laid her on the bed. As she removed the blanket to make her more comfortable, Ainsley noticed worrying signs indicating the girl had gone through hardships. Quinn clearly needed care not just for the fever, but for her overall health. Ainsley felt a lump in her throat. What could have happened to this child? Quickly, she searched for a thermometer and fever medication in her first aid kit. Quinn's temperature was frighteningly high. Ainsley moistened a towel with cold water and placed it on the girl's forehead, trying to bring down the fever. Through the bedroom window, she could hear the storm roaring outside, making it impossible to seek medical help, especially with the road blocked by the fallen tree. "Everything will be all right, little one," whispered Ainsley, more to herself than to Quinn. "I'll take care of you, I promise." Quinn began to stir in bed, mumbling incoherent words. The fever was making her delirious. Ainsley continued changing the cold compress, administered fever medication, and stayed by the bed holding Quinn's small, hot hand. The girl's deliriums became clearer, and Ainsley could distinguish some words. She called for her mother repeatedly, with a broken voice that broke Ainsley's heart. Then, something unexpected. Quinn began to mention a medallion man who appeared in her dreams. "Mommy, is it him?" "The medallion man," mumbled Quinn, her voice weak and distant. "You said he would find me one day. He has eyes like mine." Ainsley watched, worried and intrigued. Who could this medallion man be who apparently meant so much to Quinn and her mother? The golden medallion still hung from the girl's neck, softly gleaming in the lamplight. It seemed to contain an important story, perhaps the key to Quinn's past and possibly her future. The girl's temperature remained alarmingly high, and her breathing became increasingly difficult. The rain beat against the windows with renewed force, as if wanting to get in, and the thunder seemed ever closer. Isolated by the storm and the fallen tree, Ainsley felt the weight of responsibility for that small life in her hands. "Hang in there, Quinn," Ainsley pleaded, renewing the cold compress on the girl's forehead. "Tomorrow we'll get medical help for you. I promise I won't abandon you." The night advanced slowly, as the teacher kept watch over the restless sleep of the small stranger that fate had placed in her path. Outside, the storm continued relentlessly, as if announcing that this night was just the beginning of a journey that would forever change the lives of Quinn and Ainsley. The golden medallion shone softly on the girl's neck, keeping secrets that would soon come to light, secrets that connected the little orphan to a past she didn't know and to a future she couldn't yet imagine. The night seemed endless as Ainsley fought against time to save little Quinn. The hours dragged heavily, and the storm continued to punish the city with its relentless fury. The girl's fever stubbornly resisted all the teacher's efforts, who had already changed the cold compresses countless times and administered the few medications she had at home. Sweat ran down Quinn's forehead, her black hair stuck to her pale face that occasionally contorted in expressions of pain. Ainsley tried using her cell phone repeatedly to call an ambulance, but the storm had brought down the lines, and the few calls that did go through only found busy signals. Despair began to overcome Ainsley, who watched helplessly as the girl's condition worsened with each hour. "Please, someone answer," murmured Ainsley, dialing the emergency number again with trembling fingers. "This child needs urgent medical help. I can't just let her collapse in front of me." The golden medallion on Quinn's neck shone softly in the dim light of the lamp. While adjusting the blankets over the feverish girl, Ainsley examined the jewel more closely. It was a beautiful piece with refined craftsmanship, certainly valuable, a stark contrast to the worn clothes and fragile condition of the child. The piece had an intricate design, and what appeared to be a family crest engraved on one side, along with a date. Ainsley couldn't imagine how such a precious object had come into the hands of a small beggar girl, but it clearly meant a lot to Quinn. During her feverish delirium, the girl frequently clutched the medallion with her thin little fingers, as if it were her only connection to a lost past and an uncertain future. "Mom said he has one just like it," Quinn murmured during a brief moment of lucidity, her feverish eyes fixed on the ceiling. "She said when I found the man with the medallion like mine, everything would be all right. Do you think he really exists?" Quinn's breathing was becoming increasingly difficult, interspersed with coughing fits that shook her small body. Ainsley measured her temperature again. It was even higher than before. Placing her hand on the girl's chest, she felt the rapid heartbeat pounding like a frightened little bird trying to escape a cage. Quinn needed medical attention immediately, or she wouldn't survive the night. A difficult decision formed in Ainsley's mind. She could no longer wait for help that wouldn't come. She would have to take Quinn to the hospital on her own, even with the main road blocked by the fallen tree. There was an alternative path, a dirt road that went around the neighborhood. It would be longer and certainly dangerous with that storm, but it seemed to be Quinn's only chance. "Quinn, I need to take you to the hospital now," explained Ainsley. Kneeling beside the bed to be at the girl's eye level, "The main road is blocked, so we'll have to try another way. It's going to be a difficult journey, but I promise I won't leave you alone for even a second. Do you trust me?" Ainsley quickly gathered what they would need: extra blankets, the remaining medications, a bottle of water, and a flashlight. She carefully wrapped Quinn in a dry blanket, protecting her as best she could from the rain that continued to fall mercilessly. Carrying the girl in her arms, Ainsley carefully descended the building stairs. Quinn seemed lighter than she should be for her age, another worrying sign of her precarious condition. The wind lashed at them as soon as they went out into the street, and Ainsley had to struggle to maintain her balance while running to her parked car. The water in the street already reached her ankles, reflecting the severity of the flooding affecting the entire area. Once inside the vehicle, Ainsley settled Quinn in the back seat, improvising a small bed with the blankets, and quickly departed. "The dirt road is just past that curve," she said to herself, trying to stay calm as the car slowly advanced through the water. "If we can get there, maybe the flooding will be less severe since it's higher ground. We just need to hold on." The old automobile protested with each meter traveled, the engine dangerously sputtering when the water got deeper. Ainsley gripped the steering wheel so tightly that her knuckles were white, silently praying that the car wouldn't stall. Visibility was almost zero. The headlights could barely penetrate the curtain of rain, and the windshield wiper fought uselessly against the deluge. When they finally reached the dirt road, Ainsley felt a brief moment of relief that quickly transformed into new concern. The path had turned into a slippery mud pit, and the car dangerously skidded at every curve. Quinn moaned in the back seat, mumbling incoherent words in her feverish delirium. "Hang in there, Quinn," Ainsley pleaded, glancing briefly backward. "We're almost reaching the main road. There we'll get help, I promise." "Just a little bit longer, little one. Don't give up now." The road wound along the hillside, becoming increasingly steep and treacherous. The slippery mud made it difficult to control the vehicle, which violently rocked over the uneven terrain. Ainsley proceeded with extreme caution, knowing that one mistake could be fatal for both of them. That's when it happened. A section of the path had been completely washed away by the flood, creating a deep ditch that Ainsley only noticed when it was already too late. The car partially fell into the hole, and no matter how much she tried to accelerate, the wheels just spun uselessly, sinking deeper and deeper into the mud. After several frustrated attempts, Ainsley had to accept reality. The car was stuck and they wouldn't be leaving in it. "We can't stay here," Ainsley said firmly, as if she needed to convince herself of the decision she already knew was inevitable. "I'll have to carry you, Quinn. The main road shouldn't be too far from here. We can get help there." Stepping out of the car into the merciless rain, Ainsley felt the full impact of the storm. The wind almost knocked her down immediately, and the rain struck her face like tiny frozen needles. Opening the back door, she adjusted Quinn in her arms, protecting her as much as possible with her own body. The girl was semi-conscious, her eyes opening briefly before closing again, her breathing becoming increasingly difficult. With Quinn securely in her arms, Ainsley began walking along the dirt road, each step a challenge against the mud that sucked at her feet and the rain that limited her vision. The flashlight she had brought offered only a weak beam of light against the oppressive darkness of the stormy night. "We have to keep going," whispered Ainsley, more to keep her own spirits up than anything else. "Each step brings us closer to the help you need, Quinn. I won't give up on you, not now, not after everything we've been through." The path ahead was full of obstacles. In some stretches, the rainwater had created veritable streams cutting across the road, forcing Ainsley to look for shallower spots to cross. Her arms ached from the effort of carrying Quinn, but she refused to stop or slow down. The girl's breathing was becoming increasingly irregular, a constant reminder of how urgent her mission was. It was during one of these crossings that disaster struck. While trying to cross a particularly flooded area, Ainsley didn't see a depression in the terrain. Her foot sank unexpectedly, causing her to lose balance. In a desperate reflex to protect Quinn, Ainsley twisted her body, falling backward down a small side embankment. The fall was quick and painful. She felt a sharp pain in her ankle and a strong impact on her back, but managed to keep Quinn safe in her arms, above the water and mud. "It's okay, Quinn." "Don't worry," Ainsley assured, swallowing a groan of pain as she tried to stand up. "Just a small accident. Nothing will stop us from reaching the hospital." Supporting herself on an exposed root, Ainsley managed to get to her feet, only to feel a searing pain in her right ankle when she tried to put weight on it. It was clearly sprained, possibly even fractured. Her back also ached intensely from the impact against the rocks of the embankment. For a brief moment, despair threatened to overwhelm her. How could she continue carrying Quinn in this condition? How would she reach the main road with a useless ankle? But then she felt the heat of Quinn's fever against her chest, saw the pale face of the girl fully trusting in her care, and a renewed determination arose in her heart. Leaning more on one leg than the other, ignoring the pain that ran through her entire body, Ainsley continued walking, each step a testament to her willpower. "Mommy?" Quinn called weakly, her eyes opening for a moment. Seeing Ainsley, she seemed confused initially, but then a small smile formed on her lips. "Not my mommy, but she said you would come." It was in this moment of clarity that Quinn truly saw Ainsley's sacrifice. The teacher soaked to the bone, visibly limping, her face contorted with pain, but still determined, carrying her through the storm as if nothing else mattered in the world beyond her safety. The girl's eyes filled with tears that mixed with the rain on her face. With effort, she raised a trembling hand and touched Ainsley's cheek in a gesture of deep gratitude. "You look like the angel my mother said would come for me one day," whispered Quinn, her voice weak but full of emotion. "She said I would recognize it because it wouldn't have wings, just a heart too big to fit in its chest." Quinn's words hit Ainsley like a wave of warmth amid the cold of the storm, giving her strength she didn't know she possessed. With renewed determination, she continued along the muddy road, each step a battle against pain and fatigue. Time seemed distorted. Minutes felt like hours, and there was no way to know how much time had passed since they left the car behind. The only certainty was that they needed to keep moving forward, because stopping meant giving up, and giving up was not an option. "We'll get there," Quinn promised Ainsley, her voice broken by effort. "I know it seems impossible now, but we'll make it. Sometimes life puts us in storms to show us what we're capable of, and you'll see, we're capable of much more than we imagine." After what seemed like an eternity, Ainsley finally spotted what she had been hoping for. Lights in the distance, shining through the curtain of rain. It was the main road. Cars would pass there. There would be people, help for Quinn. A new vigor filled her exhausted steps, and she quickened the pace as much as her injured ankle allowed. The distance to the lights slowly decreased, each meter a victory against the forces of nature and the limitations of her own body. But then, when salvation finally seemed within reach, Ainsley felt her strength draining completely. Her legs trembled uncontrollably, her body protesting against the continuous abuse. She staggered dangerously, struggling to maintain balance, determined not to fall, not to fail Quinn when they were so close. "Just a few more steps," Ainsley pleaded, as if negotiating with her own body. "Please, just a little more. We can't give up now, not when we're so close. Quinn needs us, we need to continue." A pair of headlights appeared on the main road, moving quickly in their direction. It was a chance, perhaps the only one they would have. With one last superhuman effort, Ainsley dragged herself closer to the road, waving frantically with one arm while firmly holding Quinn with the other. The car, a luxury vehicle that seemed out of place in that calamitous storm, zoomed past, too fast, not seeing them in the darkness. Despair threatened to swallow Ainsley in that moment, but then something happened. The brake lights of the car suddenly lit up, illuminating the rain in an intense red glow. The vehicle stopped and began to reverse, approaching again the point where Ainsley was standing. "Thank God," muttered Ainsley, her last strength draining completely as she fell to her knees in the mud, still holding Quinn protectively. "Someone saw us, we're going to get help now." The car stopped near them, and the driver's door opened quickly. A male figure stepped out into the rain, approaching with hurried steps. In the darkness, Ainsley couldn't distinguish his features, only the silhouette of a tall man. He stopped abruptly upon seeing them more closely. A woman covered in mud, obviously injured, holding an unconscious child in her arms. "My God, what happened?" he shouted to be heard above the noise of the storm, quickly crouching beside them. Ainsley felt the world spinning around her, her vision darkening at the edges. She knew she was about to faint, but needed to ensure Quinn would receive help first. With trembling fingers, she pulled the medallion from the girl's neck and extended it toward the stranger. A desperate offering, a final plea, before her strength abandoned her completely. "Save her, please." Ainsley managed to murmur, her voice almost inaudible under the roar of the storm. The golden medallion briefly shone in the car's headlights, and then Ainsley felt her body finally yielding to exhaustion. Darkness enveloped her completely as she fell unconscious in the mud, still embracing little Quinn, the stranger extending his arms to support them in their fall. Ainsley's last thought was a silent prayer that Quinn would survive, that all her sacrifice had not been in vain, that the wingless angel who had promised to save the girl had finally fulfilled its mission. The intense white light was the first thing Ainsley noticed upon regaining consciousness. Her eyes burned with the brightness, forcing her to close them again before trying a second time, now more cautiously. The environment around her gradually took shape: light walls, medical equipment, and the unmistakable antiseptic aroma of a hospital. She was lying in a comfortable bed, with soft sheets and pillows that perfectly supported her aching head. An IV was connected to her left arm, and nearby monitors emitted rhythmic beeps. This wasn't a public hospital. The equipment was too modern, the private room too spacious. Confused, Ainsley tried to get up only to feel a sharp pain in her bandaged ankle. Memories of the previous night returned in an overwhelming torrent. The storm, Quinn burning with fever, the desperate journey down the dirt road, the fall down the ravine, and finally the luxury car that stopped at the last moment. But where was Quinn? "Quinn!" exclaimed Ainsley, trying again to get up, ignoring the pain. "Where is the girl who was with me? A small child with a high fever. Please, can someone tell me where she is?" A middle-aged nurse quickly entered the room upon hearing the commotion. With firm but gentle gestures, she helped Ainsley settle back into bed, adjusting the pillows and checking the IV. Her face showed professional compassion, the kind that comes with years of experience dealing with distressed patients. She explained that Ainsley and the girl had been brought in the previous night by a driver who found them on the road during the storm. Both were in critical condition, Ainsley with hypothermia, dehydration, and a severely sprained ankle in addition to various cuts and bruises. Quinn was in a much more serious condition and had been immediately taken to the pediatric intensive care unit, where doctors were still struggling to stabilize her. "The little one is receiving the best possible care at this moment," assured the nurse, checking Ainsley's vital signs. "You were unconscious when you arrived, completely exhausted. The doctors were impressed by your endurance, carrying a child for miles in that storm, even with an ankle in that state. It was a true miracle that both of you survived." Ainsley barely heard the compliments about her determination. Her mind was focused exclusively on Quinn. "I need to see her immediately. She was so ill on the road the fever wouldn't break. Please take me to her. I need to know how she is," she pleaded, holding the nurse's arm with urgency. The following minutes were a blur of negotiations and preparations. The nurse, initially reluctant, eventually agreed to take Ainsley to see Quinn, as long as it was in a wheelchair, and only for a few minutes. While they were preparing her for transport, a doctor entered the room, a tall man with a serious expression and an impeccably white coat. He observed Ainsley for a few moments before approaching, flipping through a clipboard with test results. Without wasting time on introductions, he went straight to the point. Quinn suffered from a severe congenital heart condition that had been aggravated by the high fever and physical exhaustion. The girl needed urgent cardiac surgery, as well as special medications that were not part of the hospital's regular stock. His tone was clinical, devoid of emotion. It was just another case, another medical record to be filled. "The little one is temporarily stabilized, but her condition is extremely delicate," explained the doctor, avoiding eye contact while continuing to analyze the documents. "However, I must inform you that without health insurance and without resources to cover the treatment costs, We will have to transfer her to the public hospital as soon as she is in condition to be transported. I'm sorry, but those are the institution's rules. Ainsley felt her blood freeze in her veins. Even in her modest profession as a teacher, she knew well the reality of public hospitals. Endless lines, lack of equipment, shortage of medications. Quinn needed immediate specialized care. She couldn't wait in line in an overwhelmed system. "Doctor, please, there must be some alternative," Ainsley implored, her voice choked with emotion. "That girl has already lost her mother. She's completely alone in the world. You can't simply transfer her to a place where she might not receive the necessary treatment in time." The doctor finally looked at Ainsley, his face softening slightly in the face of the woman's evident anguish. However, his words remained firm. He explained that, unfortunately, the procedures were clear, and the hospital could not bear the costs of such an expensive surgery for a patient without resources. He tried to sound reassuring when mentioning that the public hospital had competent professionals, but they both knew it wasn't the same thing. Before leaving, he promised that Quinn would not be transferred in the next 24 hours, giving Ainsley a brief time to try to find some solution. The nurse, who had remained silent during the entire conversation, helped Ainsley get comfortable in the wheelchair and finally took her to see Quinn. "I don't understand how they can be so cold," Ainsley vented as they were led through the immaculate hospital corridors. "We're talking about a child's life, not a simple administrative procedure. There must be some way to get help for her." The pediatric intensive care unit was a surreal environment, too quiet, too aseptic, with small children connected to machines too large for their fragile bodies. Quinn was in one of the central beds, surrounded by monitors and equipment. She seemed even smaller and more vulnerable amid all that medical technology. Her face was pale, with deep dark circles contrasting with her almost translucent skin. An assisted breathing tube was connected to her mouth, and various electrodes monitored her vital signs. The medallion that meant so much to her was no longer around her neck, probably removed during the medical procedures. Ainsley felt a lump in her throat seeing the girl in that state, so distant from the child who, even in the midst of high fever, had found the strength to call her an angel. "She fought hard during the night," commented the nurse in a low voice, positioning Ainsley's wheelchair close to Quinn's bed. "The doctors almost lost her twice, but she refused to give up. She has a strong spirit, this little one." Ainsley reached out to lightly touch Quinn's hand, being careful not to disturb any of the tubes or sensors connected to the girl. The child's skin was cold to the touch, so different from the scalding fever of the night before. "You'll be okay, Quinn," whispered Ainsley, although she wasn't sure if the girl could hear her. "I promised I wouldn't abandon you, and I won't break that promise. I'll find a way to get you the treatment you need." After a few minutes that seemed like seconds, the nurse informed them that they needed to return to the room. Ainsley asked for more time, but the intensive care unit rules were strict. On the way back, they passed through the hospital waiting room, where some patients and companions were waiting for care. A stack of today's newspapers was available to help pass the time. Impulsively, Ainsley asked the nurse to grab a copy for her. She needed to occupy her mind with something while trying to think of a solution to Quinn's problem. Back in the room alone again, Ainsley began to flip through the newspaper distractedly, more to have something to do with her restless hands than out of real interest in the news. "There must be some foundation, some social program that can help," she muttered to herself as she turned the pages without really paying attention. "Maybe I could organize a fundraising campaign at the school, talk to the students' parents." It was then that her eyes caught something that made her freeze. In the society section of the newspaper, there was a large article about Fletcher Blackwood, one of the most powerful and influential businessmen in the region. The piece celebrated his professional achievements, but especially his philanthropic work. According to the text, Blackwood had lost his pregnant wife in a tragic accident 8 years ago. The couple was in a car that was swept away by a flood during a severe storm. His wife Seraphina's body was found days later, but it was believed that the baby she was carrying had also perished. Devastated by the loss, Fletcher had channeled his pain into charitable works, especially aimed at orphaned and abandoned children. He had created the Blackwood Foundation, which built hospitals, orphanages, and schools in underprivileged areas. 8 years, murmured Ainsley, quickly doing the math. Quinn is approximately that age. But what really made Ainsley's heart race was the photo accompanying the article. Fletcher Blackwood was a tall man with aristocratic features and penetrating eyes identical to Quinn's. And around his neck, partially visible above his impeccable suit, was a golden medallion that looked exactly like the one Quinn carried. The resemblance was unmistakable, impossible to be coincidence. Ainsley felt dizzy with the revelation. Could Quinn be the daughter that Fletcher believed he had lost in the accident? Had Seraphina survived long enough to give birth before succumbing to her injuries, or perhaps been found by someone who helped her deliver? The possibilities were many, but they all pointed to the same incredible direction. That's it. "It must be him," exclaimed Ainsley, her mind working frantically to connect all the pieces. The man with the medallion that Quinn mentioned in her deliriums. Her mother must have told her about her father, given her the medallion as a form of identification, in case they ever met. One detail in the report caught her attention even more. The newspaper announced, "Tonight charity gala at the Royal Hotel sponsored by the Blackwood Foundation to raise funds for the new Children's Cardiac Center." The irony of the situation did not escape Ainsley. The father Quinn had never known was raising money for a center that could save the lives of children like her, without knowing that his own daughter was fighting for her life just a few blocks away. Looking at the clock on the wall, Ainsley saw that the gala would begin in 2 hours. It was enough time to get there if she could leave the hospital. "I have to go to this event," decided Ainsley, her gaze fixed on Fletcher Blackwood's photo. It's Quinn's only chance. If he really is her father, he will not only save her life but also recover the daughter he believed he had lost. With renewed determination, Ainsley touched the bell to call the nurse. When she appeared, Ainsley explained that she needed to leave urgently for a few hours to resolve a matter that could save Quinn's life. The nurse naturally protested. Ainsley was still recovering, her ankle needed rest, and technically she hadn't been discharged. But something in the intensity of Ainsley's eyes must have touched the healthcare professional, because after a few minutes of argumentation, she sighed deeply and said she would help, as long as Ainsley promised to return immediately to the hospital afterward. "My clothes are ruined by mud, I can't go like this," Ainsley explained, aware that she needed to enter one of the most elegant events in the city. "Would you have something you could lend me?" "Anything would do." The nurse returned 15 minutes later with a simple skirt and a discreet blouse, obviously her own change of clothes. It was nothing comparable to the gala attire that would certainly be present at the event, but at least they were clean and presentable. Ainsley thanked her profusely while getting dressed, ignoring the pain in her ankle and back. The nurse still tried to convince her to use a crutch, but Ainsley refused. She couldn't show up at the event looking even more vulnerable than she already was. Before leaving, she asked about Quinn's medallion, and the nurse informed her it was stored with the girl's other belongings. Retrieving the precious object, Ainsley clutched it firmly in her hand. It was her only proof, her only tangible link between Quinn and the man who could save her. "I'm not doing this just for Quinn," Ainsley confessed, as the nurse helped her with the final preparations. "I'm doing it for him too. If that girl really is his daughter, I'm about to return the greatest gift a man could receive." The Royal Hotel was an imposing building in the city centre, an architectural landmark that blended classical elements with modern touches. Even under the soft light of dusk, its marble columns and ornate windows exuded an aura of luxury and exclusivity. Ainsley felt completely out of place as she climbed the steps of the main entrance, aware of her still damp hair and simple clothes amid limousines and guests in gala attire. Her ankle protested with each step, but she ignored the pain, focused solely on her mission. In the spacious lobby decorated with elaborate floral arrangements and crystal chandeliers, the event security was already set up. Men in dark suits checked invitations and controlled access to the main hall. "Please, I need to speak with Mr. Fletcher Blackwood," Ainsley explained to the first security guard who approached her, blocking her path. "It's an extremely urgent matter, a question of life and death." The man just smiled politely, accustomed to dealing with people trying to enter without an invitation, claiming emergencies or important connections. "I'm sorry, ma'am, but without a formal invitation, I cannot allow your entry." "Mr. Blackwood is busy with preparations for his opening speech." Ainsley tried again, explaining that she had crucial information for Fletcher, something related to his late wife, Serafina. She mentioned the medallion but didn't show it. It was her only trump card and she needed to save it for the right moment. The security guard remained immovable, suggesting that she contact Fletcher's secretary to schedule a meeting on another occasion. Ainsley knew she didn't have that time. Quinn could be transferred to the public hospital the next day, and her chances would drastically diminish. She walked away, pretending to give up, only to try a side entrance a few minutes later, where she encountered similar resistance. "This girl will die if I don't get to talk to him today," Ainsley insisted, her voice rising with frustration and desperation. "How can you live with that on your conscience? We're talking about the life of an 8-year-old child." After several frustrated attempts, Ainsley finally managed to find a position in the lobby from where she could observe the main hall through partially open doors. Elegantly dressed guests circulated with champagne flutes, animatedly conversing in small groups. On a decorated stage at the back of the hall, technicians adjusted the sound for what would be the opening speech. And then she saw him, Fletcher Blackwood in person, exactly as in the newspaper photo, but even more imposing. He wore a perfectly tailored suit that accentuated his tall, athletic figure. His face conveyed a curious mixture of authority and melancholy, as if he carried an invisible weight, even amid success and admiration. And yes, there was the golden medallion, partially visible beneath his silk tie. "It's now or never," Ainsley murmured to herself, clutching Quinn's medallion in her hand. "Forgive me for the scene I'm about to cause, Mr. Blackwood, but I have no choice." Taking advantage of a moment when the security guards were distracted by the arrival of some important guests, Ainsley quickly slipped inside the hall. Keeping close to the walls and partially hiding behind decorative columns, she gradually approached the stage where Fletcher was conversing with some organizers. Her heart was beating so hard, it seemed to want to escape her chest. When she was finally close enough, she saw that Fletcher was preparing to go on stage. The master of ceremonies was already announcing him. It was now or never. "Mr. Blackwood, please, I need to speak with you," shouted Ainsley, abandoning any pretense of discretion and running toward the stage. The entire hall seemed to freeze, heads turned in her direction, expressions of shock and disapproval on the faces of the social elite. 2 security guards immediately moved to intercept her, grabbing her arms firmly, but not before she managed to raise the medallion in the air, in full view of Fletcher. "Mr. Blackwood, please look at this," Ainsley shouted, shaking the golden medallion that shone brightly under the hall's lights. Fletcher, who had already taken 2 steps toward the podium, stopped abruptly. His eyes, initially surprised by the interruption, fixed on the object that Ainsley was holding. The color seemed to drain from his face, and for a moment he stood completely still, as if he had seen a ghost. With a quick gesture, he signaled for the security guards to release her, quickly descending the stage steps and walking toward her. "Where did you get this?" asked Fletcher with a controlled but tense voice, his eyes never leaving the medallion that Ainsley held. There was something simultaneously authoritarian and vulnerable in his posture, like a man accustomed to controlling all situations, suddenly confronted with something that completely escaped his understanding. The crowd of guests formed a semicircle around them, all watching the unusual scene with poorly disguised curiosity. The simple woman, visibly out of place, confronting the event's host with an object that clearly disturbed him deeply. Ainsley felt the weight of all those stares, but remained firm, focusing only on the man in front of her and the girl who was fighting for her life a few blocks away. "An 8-year-old girl is dying in the hospital right now." "She had this with her," replied Ainsley, breathless from running and emotion. The medallion swung gently in her extended hand, capturing the light from the chandeliers on its polished metal. Fletcher narrowed his eyes, a shadow of distrust passing over his face. "And you are?" he questioned, his voice cold and calculated, as if he were evaluating a possible fraud or extortion. Ainsley straightened her shoulders, ignoring the pain that ran through her exhausted body. "Just a teacher who found her on the street during yesterday's storm," she responded with dignity, sustaining Fletcher's penetrating gaze. "She was alone, soaked and with a high fever. I tried to care for her, but her condition worsened, and I had to take her to the hospital through the storm. She needs urgent cardiac surgery, but without resources she'll be transferred to the public hospital tomorrow. where she might not receive treatment in time. Fletcher took the medallion from Ainsley's hands, examining it carefully. His strong fingers trembled slightly as he touched the object, turning it to see the inscription engraved on the back. "Please, look at the date engraved on the medallion," asked Ainsley, her voice softer now. "See, it's the date of your marriage to Serafina, isn't it?" The mention of his deceased wife's name made Fletcher look up abruptly, a mixture of pain and astonishment in his gaze. "How do you know that?" he asked, his voice losing some of its previous coldness. "I read about the accident in the newspaper today," Ainsley explained quickly, "about how you lost your pregnant wife years ago during a storm. Quinn is approximately that age, and according to her, her mother passed away recently, after years of hardship. She constantly mentioned a man from the medallion who appeared in her dreams, said that her mother had promised that one day she would find him." Fletcher shook his head slowly, as if trying to dismiss an absurd idea. "This could be a fraud," he said, although his voice no longer carried the same conviction. "Anyone could have read about my story in the newspapers, fabricated a copy of this medallion." Ainsley felt tears forming in her eyes. She was so close and yet so far from getting help for Quinn. "I'm not asking anything for myself," she pleaded, her voice choked with emotion. "Just come see the girl. She has the same eyes as the woman in the photo beside you on that table," she said, pointing to a framed portrait of Serafina that was part of the event's decoration. "If she's not who I think she is, at least help her out of charity. She's dying." Something in Ainsley's desperate sincerity seemed to finally penetrate Fletcher's defenses. He looked again at the medallion in his hand, then at Serafina's portrait, and finally at Ainsley, whose eyes begged not for herself, but for a child she barely knew. With a deep sigh, Fletcher made his decision. "Cancel my speech," he ordered a nearby assistant without taking his eyes off Ainsley. "Tell the guests an unexpected emergency has arisen. The gala should continue without me." In minutes they were in Fletcher's luxury car, the same one that had stopped for Ainsley and Quinn the night before, although she had been too unconscious to recognize it at the time. The driver quickly navigated the streets leading to the hospital, while Fletcher remained in tense silence, Quinn's medallion still in his hands. Ainsley could feel the internal battle he was fighting, between rational skepticism and emotional hope, between the fear of being deceived and the desperate desire for it to be true. "I understand this seems crazy," said Ainsley, breaking the silence, "but when I first saw her, I felt there was something special about her, something that went beyond simple compassion for an abandoned child. Perhaps it was fate that placed me on that street, in that storm, at that exact moment." They arrived at the hospital quickly. Fletcher followed Ainsley through the corridors, attracting curious glances. In the pediatric intensive care unit, he stopped in front of the glass window, his eyes searching until he found Quinn among the medical equipment. Fletcher's face transformed upon seeing her, skepticism crumbling instantly. "My God," he whispered. "It's like seeing Serafina again. The same features, the same birthmark near the ear." At that moment, the monitors connected to Quinn triggered alarms. Red lights flashed and the medical team rushed to attend to her, while Fletcher, pressing his hands against the glass, asked in a strangled voice, "What's happening?" A nurse who was hurriedly leaving the intensive care unit briefly stopped upon recognizing Ainsley. "She's in cardiac arrest," she quickly explained. "We've been trying to stabilize her all day, but her heart is too weak." Through the glass, Ainsley saw the doctor applying the defibrillator to Quinn's small chest, her tiny body jumping with the shock. 1, 2, 3 attempts. The monitors continued to show an almost straight line. The nurse sadly shook her head before running back to help the team. "She's slipping away," she whispered, more to herself than to Ainsley or Fletcher. Fletcher, who until then had maintained a rigid and controlled posture, even facing the possibility of having found the daughter he believed dead, finally crumbled. His broad shoulders curved, and he rested his forehead against the cold glass, eyes fixed on the small figure fighting for life just a few meters away. A solitary tear ran down his aristocratic face, followed by another and another. The powerful businessman, accustomed to controlling financial empires and commanding hundreds of employees, found himself completely powerless before the fragile fate of a child he had just discovered. "No," muttered Fletcher, his voice choked with contained emotion. "I can't lose her before I even get to know her. We need a rare blood type for urgent transfusion," shouted the doctor, hurriedly exiting the emergency room. His eyes scanned the corridor until they found Fletcher and Ainsley. "The girl has a very rare blood type. Without the transfusion, we won't be able to stabilize her for surgery." Fletcher stepped forward, his face transformed by determination that replaced the despair of moments before. With the firm voice of someone accustomed to making difficult decisions, he declared, "Test my blood, if she really is. My daughter, there's a good chance of compatibility. Do whatever is necessary, doctor," continued Fletcher, while rolling up the sleeve of his fine suit jacket. "Money is not an issue. Use the best medications. Call the best specialists. That girl will not die tonight." The following hours passed in an agonizing succession of medical procedures and tense waiting. Ainsley and Fletcher remained in the waiting room, united by an invisible bond forged by Quinn's fate. The test confirmed not only that Fletcher's blood was compatible, but also, through a quick preliminary DNA analysis, that he was, without a doubt, the girl's biological father. When the doctor brought this news, Fletcher covered his face with his hands, finally allowing himself to release emotions contained for 8 long years. "Serafina managed," he murmured, raising tear-filled eyes to Ainsley. "She survived long enough to give birth to our daughter. All these nights I woke up thinking I had heard the cry of a baby I believed I had lost, and it was really my daughter, somewhere, needing me." The transfusion was successful, and Quinn began to stabilize. In the following hours, Fletcher mobilized impressive resources. A team of renowned cardiologists was summoned on an emergency basis, special medications were transported from distant hospitals, and additional equipment arrived in record time. What seemed impossible a few hours earlier was transformed into reality by the power of influence and determination of a father who had just found the daughter he believed he had lost forever. 2 weeks had passed since that critical night. Quinn had survived a delicate heart surgery and was now in a luxurious private room, surrounded by all possible comforts. Fletcher had not left the hospital since then, sleeping on a couch near his daughter's bed, insisting on being present when she finally woke up. Ainsley had also remained close, taking turns with Fletcher in the vigil, creating between them an unplanned routine of shared care. That afternoon, Ainsley was taking the time to grade some school notebooks that a colleague had kindly brought to her, while Fletcher had finally given in to exhaustion and was sleeping in the armchair next to the bed. It was then that Quinn slowly opened her eyes, blinking several times to get used to the brightness of the room. Her confused gaze traveled around the environment until it rested first on Fletcher and then on Ainsley. A small smile formed on her pale lips. "You didn't leave," Quinn whispered, her voice hoarse from lack of use. Ainsley dropped the papers she was holding, and Fletcher instantly awoke at the sound of the girl's voice. Both rushed to the bed, positioning themselves on opposite sides like a protective frame around Quinn. Fletcher held the girl's small hand, unable to speak for a few moments, just absorbing the reality of that moment. Quinn looked at him with childish curiosity, then at Ainsley, and again at the unknown man. "Who are you, sir?" she finally asked, with the direct innocence of children. Fletcher took a deep breath, trying to contain the emotion that threatened to overflow. Slowly, he removed the golden medallion from his neck and placed it next to Quinn's, which rested on the small table near the bed. The two identical objects shone side by side, finally reunited after so many years. "I knew your mother, Serafina," he began, his voice choked. She was my wife. I believed you had gone with her in the accident." Quinn's eyes widened with the revelation, alternating between the medallions and Fletcher's face. A slow understanding seemed to form in her gaze, the pieces of a puzzle that her mother had left incomplete finally finding their places. "You're the man from the medallion," she whispered, extending hesitant fingers to touch Fletcher's face. "Mum said that one day I would find you, that you had eyes like mine." Tears finally overcame Fletcher's barriers, sliding freely down his face as he kissed Quinn's small hands. Ainsley watched the scene, her own heart overflowing with emotion. It was then that Quinn turned to her, with a question that revealed her greatest fear. "Are you going to leave now that I've found my father?" The question caught Ainsley by surprise. During those 2 weeks, she had avoided thinking about the future, focusing only on Quinn's recovery. Now, confronted with reality, she realized there was no longer any reason to stay. Fletcher had found his daughter. Quinn finally had a family and a home, and she was just the teacher who, by chance of fate, had crossed their paths. "Quinn, Ainsley began, her heart tight. "I have my job at school, my students. Now that you're well and have found your father, I need to return to my life." Quinn lowered her eyes, sadness evident on her face, and Fletcher, who was closely observing the interaction, quickly intervened. "Quinn will need someone to help her in her recovery. Someone she trusts," he said, turning to Ainsley with a look that contained something more than simple gratitude. "Miss Ainsley, would you accept being her private tutor during this period? You would stay at my house with all the necessary comfort, at least until Quinn is completely recovered." The invitation, unexpected and generous, left Ainsley speechless. Part of her wanted to refuse. She had already done her part, and prolonging the farewell would only make it harder to leave later. But seeing hope reborn in Quinn's eyes, she realized she couldn't abandon her so easily. "I think I could take a leave from school for some time," she finally replied, surprising herself with her own decision, "if it will really help Quinn's recovery." The following months passed in a surprisingly harmonious routine. Quinn recovered rapidly, exceeding all medical expectations. Fletcher's mansion, previously an elegant but empty space, was transformed by the presence of the girl and Ainsley. Laughter echoed through the once silent corridors, and children's songs replaced the oppressive silence that had dominated the place for so long. On a sunny afternoon, 3 months after leaving the hospital, Ainsley was teaching Quinn mathematics in the mansion's spacious library. The girl, already recovered from surgery, displayed a lively and curious intelligence, absorbing knowledge with ease. In the middle of an explanation about fractions, Quinn suddenly smiled, looking at the door. Ainsley turned and saw Fletcher watching them with an expression difficult to define, a mixture of happiness and something deeper, something that made Ainsley's heart race whenever their eyes met. "Daddy? Miss Ainsley said she needs to go back to her school next week," Quinn said sadly, verbalizing what everyone already knew but avoided mentioning. Fletcher frowned. In recent weeks, he had observed how his house had come to life, how Ainsley and Quinn's presence had filled voids he didn't even know existed. The idea of returning to his previous solitude terrified him, but he knew he had no right to ask Ainsley to abandon her life for them. That night, after Quinn fell asleep, Fletcher invited Ainsley to a thank-you dinner in the garden. Under a starry sky with candles illuminating the elegantly set table, he finally found the courage to express what he had been feeling. "I never thought I could feel this again," he confessed, his eyes reflecting the soft candlelight. "My house has become a home again. You brought back more than my daughter to me, Ainsley. You brought life to these empty walls." Ainsley, deeply touched by his words, remained aware of the reality that separated them. "Quinn needs stability now," she replied softly. "It wouldn't be fair to confuse her with feelings that we may not be able to define. Our worlds are very different, Fletcher. When the separation finally happened, it was painful for everyone." Ainsley returned to her life as a teacher, although she continued to visit Quinn on weekends. The girl flourished under her father's care, but never stopped asking when Ainsley would come back to live with them. Fletcher immersed himself in his business again, although something had fundamentally changed in his approach to life. 6 months after Ainsley's departure, Fletcher unexpectedly appeared at the public school where she worked. His arrival in a luxury car caused a stir among students and teachers. After classes, he waited for her in the empty schoolyard, a powerful man visibly out of place in that simple environment, but determined in his purpose. "I have a proposal for you," he said without preamble. "I'm establishing an educational foundation for underprivileged children, a project that will transform lives through quality education. I want you to direct it." The offer was tempting, a professional dream Ainsley had never imagined achieving, but the suspicion that it was just a strategy to keep her close lingered in her heart. "I'm not trying to buy your presence in our lives," Fletcher clarified as if reading her thoughts. "I'm offering a partnership to realize the dream you told me about, the one about transforming lives through education." Ainsley accepted the professional challenge, but maintained emotional distance, fearing that Quinn would create hopes for a family that might not materialize. Months turned into a year, and the foundation thrived under her passionate direction, while the three maintained a cordial but cautious relationship. On Quinn's birthday, Fletcher organized a splendid party. During the traditional wish before blowing out the candles, the girl surprised everyone with her audacious declaration, "I want you two to stop pretending you don't love each other because of me." Fletcher and Ainsley were speechless, both blushing intensely. Quinn, with the wisdom that sometimes only children possess, continued, "Mum told me before she left that I would know how to recognize true love when I saw it. And I see how you look at each other when you think nobody is noticing." That night after the party, they finally confronted the feelings they had tried to deny for so long. Fletcher confessed that he feared betraying Serafina's memory by falling in love again. Ainsley admitted her fear of being seen as self-interested, of tarnishing the purity of what they felt with the shadows of social differences. "It was Quinn who taught us to love again," Fletcher concluded, holding Ainsley's hands in his. "She gave us a second chance to be happy. Serafina would have approved. She always said that love is the only wealth that increases when shared." 6 months later, in an intimate ceremony in the mansion's garden, Fletcher and Ainsley got married. Quinn, radiant in her bridesmaid dress, delivered the rings, which had miniatures of the medallions engraved inside them, eternal symbols of destiny's power to unite three lives that seemed fated never to meet. "Today isn't just their wedding," Quinn announced during the reception, her clear voice carrying the emotion of someone who finally achieved her greatest wish. "It's the official birth of our family." Fletcher embraced his new wife and daughter, forming a perfect circle of love and belonging. "Who would have thought that a storm could bring so much light into our lives?" he murmured, still amazed by the twists of fate. Ainsley smiled, completing the thought. It wasn't the storm. It was a brave little girl who taught us that family isn't just about blood, but about love. In the final scene, the three visited Serafina's grave. Quinn carefully placed flowers and whispered her gratitude. "Thank you, Mum, for sending me 2 angels to take care of me." Fletcher and Ainsley, holding hands with Quinn, walked toward the sunset, their hearts finally complete. A family that destiny, through a powerful storm and a simple medallion, had brought together against all odds. Did you enjoy the story of Quinn, Ainsley, and Fletcher? Then subscribe to the channel, leave your like and comment where you're watching from. Oh, and there's another story waiting for you right here on the screen. Click there and I'll be waiting for you.